Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hi, and thanks for tuning in again to Shattered Reality. I am Kate Valentine.
And I am Fahrusha.
And we're so happy that you're joining us because today we have an incredibly interesting guest.
Yes, we do. But before we go into that and introduce our special, extremely interesting and wonderful guest, I wanted to remind everybody that this is the beginning of our second year of broadcasting. And in our first year, we have had 18 really thought-provoking interviews with major people in the field of the paranormal and consciousness studies. And if you have enjoyed us on Shattered Reality, I would really appreciate if you would support us by liking us on Facebook, liking our blogs, shatteredreality.com and shatteredrealitypodcast.com and shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com. Now, we have had a little bit of trouble staying afloat on iTunes. We've had some problems. We're not sure if it's hacking or not, but we have been working on that, getting our podcasts back up online, and I have also been putting it up on YouTube. We have so far 6 of our first 6 podcasts are on YouTube, and I'm planning on putting a couple more each week until I catch up with our podcast now, which will be the 19th, which we are currently speaking to you about now. Now, again, before I make my introduction, I would like to remind you that we are free and open media. We have no media overlords telling us what to say. We have no sponsors. We ask for no money. All we ask for is your support in listening in and liking us online. Did you know, by the way, and I got this off Stephen Schwartz's website, did you know that all of the media that we see comes from basically 6 corporations: GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. Those 6 entities control more than 90% of what everyone in the United States reads, watches, or listens to. And to make matters worse, these are the statistics from 2010, and it has only gotten worse now in 2015. The consolidation of media has grown so much over the last 20 years that you barely hear maybe 1 or 2 voices, and a journalism where we really look into the subjects rather than looking up the answers on Google really has faded away. And this has been a problem that has been mentioned on other podcasts about the UFO field. People feel they can write books by just Googling the stuff on the internet and never going out and finding out anything firsthand. But really, we need to keep the internet free and open. And one way we can do this is by liking our favorite podcasts on the various places where they exist. For us right now, it is online on YouTube, on our websites, and on Facebook, and soon again to be on iTunes, we hope. Now, with that being said, I would like to introduce to you a gentleman with incredible credentials. He has worked for NASA as a rocket scientist. He has written I'm going to use the word incredible again, a 900-page, 3-part book called My Big T.O.E. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome Thomas Campbell to Shattered Reality.
Well, I'm glad to be here and share this time with you and your podcast. I'm a big supporter of free and open internet, so we're on the same sheet of music there.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So to start out, just to bring our readers and listeners up to speed, you started out as a physicist. You worked for NASA, and then you took some interesting side trips of the mind. One of which I know a lot about, one of which I know less about, but our listeners may not know anything about how you progressed. So can you fill us in a little bit about the beginnings of your interest in consciousness research?
Sure. I graduated from graduate school 1972 and did my thesis work in experimental nuclear physics, and took a job, my first job, with Army Technical Intelligence. And there, my boss handed me a book called Journeys Out of the Body, written by Bob Monroe.
Wow. That's somewhat unexpected.
Yes. So the people that worked in this place were all engineers and scientists for the most part, mathematicians, technical people. And my boss handed me this book. I'd only been there for maybe 3 months, and I kind of thought it was a test. He handed me this book and said, Tom, what do you think? Read this and tell me what you think. So I read it, and what I thought was, well, if this guy happens to be telling the truth, then wow, because there's a whole lot more reality out there that, I don't know anything about. And on the other hand, if he's just making it all up so he can sell books, then, it's no big thing. How do you know which of those two cases is the more likely one or the true one? Well, we just kind of left it at that, and evidently I didn't flunk that test because my boss agreed with me. And about 3 months after that, we found out that Bob Monroe lived only about a 45-minute drive away from the town where I was working and where this facility was. So we made some arrangements to go out and visit him. And when I was asked whether or not I wanted to go, I said absolutely, because I want to know, is this guy nuts or what? What's his game? Is he just trying to sell books, or is this something real? Because in his book, if you've ever read Journeys Out of the Body, he wasn't trying to convince anybody of anything. He just wrote it like a diary. This is what happened to me. I did this, and this is what happened. And he did a lot of things that were evidential, collected information and affected things that then he could check on later to see whether indeed, he did get the right information. So he had this paranormal information coming to him, and I paranormal is just, what can we say, beyond normal is what that means. In other words, there's no explanation for it as far as our normal way of looking at physics. And I guess later I'll get into the idea that that's not true anymore. With my big toe, the paranormal just becomes normal. There's an explanation, a logical, scientific explanation that makes the paranormal normal from a bigger picture. But anyway, back to the beginnings. So while we were there at Monroe Laboratory, he had just built this laboratory. Actually, it didn't have anything in it yet. It was just a shell of a building, and he knew that he needed to do that, and he wasn't quite sure now that he had finished it what he was going to do with it. So he looked at us, and there was about 15 of us that had come out to find out who Bob Monroe really was. And he said, well, you guys are all engineers and scientists. I just have this lab, and I'm looking for some scientists to help me do some research here on consciousness. Well, I jumped at that opportunity, and so did a friend of mine, Dennis Menerick. And from then on, we spent 15 to 20 hours a week working at the Monroe Institute Laboratory, just called it the lab, studying consciousness. So as you see, my career in physics and my career as a consciousness researcher both started at about the same time, only about 6 months difference there. And both of them continued on for a very long time. I just recently, about 5 years ago, retired as a physicist. I'm 70, almost 71. I'll be 71 in a couple of weeks.
Well, happy birthday.
Yes. So, I've been doing both for a long time, and I didn't work all this time, at NASA. You mentioned that I'm a NASA physicist. That's true. I did work for NASA, but that was more toward the end of my career, when I was a consultant and worked there for some years. But anyway, so that's how I got. That's how a nice, ordinary physicist like me, ended up in this strange place of consciousness research. And once you go down this trail and learn things and have experiences and find truth, you can't let it go. You can't, just walk away from it and say, well, that was interesting, but now back to a normal life. So I kept working at it. And after, maybe 5 or 6 years, 7 years with Bob Monroe, we were so successful in producing technology that could help other people experience the out-of-body phenomena that we got inundated with people who wanted to come to the lab and experience, this technology. So I became more of a trainer rather than a researcher at that point, because we just had so many people coming to us. So Dennis and I both kind of slipped out the back and kind of went on our way while Bob Monroe turned his lab and then bought more and moved, put up facilities, and then the Monroe Institute was created. When I was with Bob, there really was no Monroe Institute. That was before that happened.
So let me just stop you for a moment and ask you, which part of the technology were you most involved with? Was it the black box, the check units, the audio, electrical engineering part? What part were you most involved with?
Well, we did two main things there. We built all the equipment, the measuring equipment, and so on. Bought, made, and sometimes pilfered wherever we could find it to get the equipment that we needed. But the thing that Dennis and I did is that, and actually it was Dennis who first came up with the idea, not me, was the binaural beat phenomena.
Really?
Binaural beats are it's a pure tone in, let's say, your right ear, and a pure tone plus just a little higher frequency in the other ear. And those two pure tones mix in the corpus callosum, which is the area right between the two hemispheres. It's where all the cross connects to the hemispheres are. And what happens is that if you do this, and if you put the binaural beat at, say, an alpha frequency, maybe 10 or 14 hertz, then you will get in a very relaxed state. And if you put it down around 4 hertz, which is a low theta state, that's kind of where the hypnagogic things happen as you're falling to sleep. Then that's a very good state, equivalent to what many people get after about a decade of practicing meditation. And it enabled people to get in this state, stay in it stably, rather than just drift in and out for hours at a time. So that was kind of our contribution. Bob now added some pink noise that he modulated and some other sounds with it, and he patented this as hemisync, which is the kind of trademark technology for the Monroe Institute. So that's really what we and we experimented with everything, anything that we thought of that we thought might have some connection to consciousness and conscious experience. We tried it, and then we kept what worked and let go what didn't, and did that for, like I say, about 5 years before we got so popular that it became more training.
Well, I think our wonderful engineer, Bill, is taking notes on all the technical information about the hertz and so forth. And I hope he's writing it all down and studying it a little bit.
Well, for any of your listeners who would like to make binaural beats, you can do this now very easily, because there are free sites on the internet. One of them is Naural, spelled with a G, Naural.com. I think it's a .com, maybe a .org, but anyway, you can look that up. If you Google it, you'll find out. And there you can tune up the binaural beat and the base frequency of your choice. It's free. It will make WAV files, which then of course you can get MP3 files, and it's an easy thing to do. And if you want some directions and instruction about how to make a good tape, then I go to the MBT forum, and I did a pretty long post there some years ago about how to go about making that.
Well, that's very instructive. That's very instructive and very helpful. Sometimes I have clients that want me to record affirmations for them, and perhaps I will use that information to do that. And so then you left Monroe because you didn't want to be a trainer. That's like a little bit like being something between leading a group psychotherapy session and being a school teacher, and so that wasn't for your scientific bent. And so then what happened?
Well, I was made. I guess a few years went by, and I was made a part of the board of directors, a member of the board of directors for the Monroe Institute, and I did that for a decade or so, up until the time that Bob died. But I moved to the southeast, and then's where I started working in missile defense, and that's where I bumped into NASA, because NASA has a big facility there as well. And I spent then many hours by myself, not really in a lab, studying consciousness, because while I was at Monroe Laboratories, I learned how to go out of body whenever I wanted to, and do it repeatedly and with enough precision and consistency that I could do experiments in the non-physical. So that was how that I figured out how this reality worked. Had I tried to figure it out from just the outside looking in, I think I never would have gotten there.
Can you give us an example of one of the experiments that you did that was successful for our listeners? I'm sure they would be more than fascinated to hear that.
Or even actually just define out-of-body experience, because, I mean, I know a lot of, to you, I know, Rose, Fahrusha, it's like second nature, but I mean, I'm not as into this as Fahrusha is, Tom. Okay. So a lot of people, they sort of get this idea like you close your eyes and then, you sort of float off somewhere and you look back and you see yourself. But I don't think that's actually it, is it?
Can I make a suggestion here? Yeah. Just one suggestion, and maybe Tom might agree with me on this or might not, and it becomes a conversation then, there's kind of a spectrum of experiences that might start somewhere with remote viewing, where you don't actually leave your body, and then it can go into out of body, and then it can go into astral projection, where actually if I was to astral project into my friend's house, they might actually be able to see me, where out of body they wouldn't see me. Do you see that it's a spectrum at all of experience there, Tom?
There is a lot of related experiences, yes, and you'd have to add lucid dreaming to that.
Yes.
And these are all, let's say, first cousins, and they're really not so different. So let me define the out-of-body first, very generally, very generically. And this is not necessarily the out-of-body that you read about in a book, because that tends to be a little more specific than what I'm going to say. But out-of-body is when you let go of your sense data. It's just as simple as that. Your reality now is defined by your sense data. If you cut off all your sense data, you would just be a point of consciousness floating in the void. You wouldn't hear, you wouldn't see, you wouldn't smell, you wouldn't feel anything. You'd just be a point of consciousness floating in the void. When you are out of body, how I interpret that is that you no longer are aware of the sense data. The sense data is just gone. Okay? That is basically means you are no longer getting sense data through your body. Now, the second thing to say is out of body has nothing to do with the body. Your consciousness doesn't live in your body. Your consciousness is not a product of your brain. Your consciousness is a separate thing, and it does not exist in this physical reality. So we'll get into some more discussion about that later, I guess. So out of body is just letting go of your physical reality input. Now, when you sit down and read an engrossing book, you let go of most of that input, but you're still connected to whatever's going on in the book. So you're still engaged mentally with what's going on in the book. So that doesn't quite qualify. Even though you've let go of senses, you haven't let go of analyzing and working and the judging, the all that stuff that's going on is still of the physical world, even if it's a make-believe fiction book. They're in terms of physical reality for the most part. So I'm talking about an out-of-body when you no longer have any outside thoughts that are impinging on your mind. You're not engaged in any particular activity other than just experiencing yourself as a point of consciousness. Okay, so that's how I define out-of-body. Now, how does that relate to the others? Well, the main difference between remote viewing, let's say lucid dreaming, and out-of-body is the attitude and the beliefs of the practitioner and the way that you go there, kind of the process, if you will, the techniques for doing that. Those are somewhat different, but they're all very much related. And rather than have them as very different things, they're just different aspects, different limitations set upon the same thing is a better way to look at it.
Okay.
And I wouldn't make any distinction at all between out-of-body and astral projection and so on. That's all part of the same thing. That's more of a free form where you're not, you have the fewest beliefs and constraints. If you're remote viewing, then you're kind of limited to looking at things in the physical world. If you are lucid dreaming, then you kind of are for the most part in a dreamlike state. And that's because you just have a belief that that's the way it ought to be.
I've had one.
Lucid dreamers can, do the same things that people in out of body can do, and remote viewers can remote view, the dark side of the moon, forward and backward in time, and other things as well. Once you take the constraints of belief and expectation away, then anybody that gets in a good altered state where they can let go of their sense data is nothing but consciousness, and then one can direct that consciousness to do anything they want. They can remote view, you can go places, do things, use your mind to heal. There's all sorts of things you can do once you learn to quiet the noise and get into that point consciousness state.
I was going to say that I've had lucid dreams which have turned into out-of-body experiences. Sure. And so that what you're saying is absolutely true as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. But what you're defining as consciousness then is that is actually the essence of the being, and the physical just happens to be there.
Yes, okay. And I can say a little bit more about that. When I finally I guess I'll tie that into the story I was telling.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
After about 35 years or so of studying and experimenting with consciousness, I finally got to the point where I thought I understood how it worked. So I wrote these books. Actually, I started it I wanted to write down the fundamentals of what I understood consciousness to be, its limitations and so on. And I started with something that was 8.5 pages long, and I was done. So I passed that around to people, and everybody who looked at it, their eyes rolled up in their heads, and they said, huh? So I said, well, I guess you need some more explanation. So I tried to make it more understandable for other people who hadn't spent 35 years studying consciousness. So I made it more and more understandable. I'd pass it out again. I'd get questions and blanks, so I'd add more to it. And eventually I ended up with so much material that I had to write 3 books and I had to break it into parts. So my intent was to write a book that explained consciousness, like a theory of consciousness. How does consciousness work? What is it? What are the limitations? What can it do? What can it do? how does it exist? Where does it come from? All of those questions are the things I addressed in my books. Now, I published those books in 2003 in February, and about 2 or 3 years later, it dawned on me that the exact same logical structure that I had built to explain consciousness and subjective reality also explained the objective reality in physics. And that in that same structure, the same logic, explained why particles are probability distributions, which means it explained the big unanswered question in quantum mechanics, and it explained why the speed of light was constant, which is the big underlying mystery of relativity. Plus, it explained a whole host of other things that had been measured, experiments done, and heads scratched because nobody had a clue why it worked that way. A lot of paranormal things fell out, like I said, as normal. So I realized that this theory was telling me that consciousness is fundamental and that the physical world is derived therefrom. It's not fundamental. And then, of course, in the book, I was onto that. I just didn't have the quantum mechanics and relativity connection yet. So that meant that this reality, as I described it, was based on information. It was an information reality, which makes sense because, as we said, all your reality, all your sense of reality has to do with the information you take in through your senses. And this information is discrete, which is why we call it digital. In other words, a discrete photon of light hits your retina, which creates a discrete pulse of a voltage pulse and current that runs down a nerve, which then reorganizes discrete neurons. So it's all discrete, it's all digital, it's all information. So what we have then as consciousness is a digital information system, you see? Wow. And that then explains a whole lot. And it's not, you can think of it as a virtual reality. So consciousness is non-physical to this physical virtual reality. So our virtual reality is an illusion, just like Buddha said. He said that all the outside world is maya, illusion, and certainly it is. It's a virtual computed reality. We can talk more about that if you like, but consciousness is non-physical. It's not a physical derivative.
One thing that I think would be really interesting to our listeners is for you to bring in the part about the Big Bang and, how that is, cannot be described exactly because it's trying to describe something in the realm of within this universe, which is really without this universe. And you do it very well. I can't reproduce it here. So okay. That's why we have you on instead of me.
Well, we have this cosmological theory called the Big Bang, and it starts with a ball of plasma, which is just a very hot, gaseous kind of substance that has a very high temperature, very high pressure, and it's contained in a relatively small volume. And at some point, of course, our physics would say at t = 0, when time began, that plasma was not any longer constrained. So all the temperature and pressure, it exploded with a big bang. That's how it gets its name. And that explosion then scattered this plasma, and as it expanded, it cooled. As it cooled, it formed and coalesced into suns, and then into planets, and so on. And that's then the story of the evolution of our physical universe. It starts with the Big Bang. Of course, the question there is, where did that ball of plasma come from?
Well, not only that, but if you say consciousness creates matter,
right?
And there would have to have been consciousness in that ball of plasma.
Exactly. Well, not in the ball of plasma, but the ball of plasma would have to have been a derivative from consciousness.
You're actually talking a very religious sort of definition of the Big Bang, then. You're talking about a creator or a god, right?
Well, a creator, but Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Just a minute, okay?
Well,
We'll get
there has
that.
to be a consciousness before you could have a Big Bang, right?
Exactly. Because the question is, where did all this plasma come from?
Right.
You see, it couldn't, if that was the origins of our physical universe, but we didn't have a physical universe before that was there. So it had
chicken and the egg.
outside of our physical universe. You see, it wasn't a part of it because the logic doesn't flow that way. You had to have the ball of plasma first, and what contained it, and what let it loose. You see, to expand. So the way it turned out is that I call it the big digital bang. We had the initial conditions, was the temperature and pressure and the volume and so on. And at t equals 0, the run button was pushed, and these initial conditions started to change according to a rule set. Okay, now a rule set means, in this case, it would be the rules of energy exchange, how things interact with each other, how do things affect each other. So that would have been the rules.
Oh.
Hello?
Set. We call that our physics, chemistry, and biology. That's the rule set. And this started to evolve, and it evolved our physical universe, and that physical universe evolved, our biology, and it evolved us, and here we are. We're part of this evolution. So as a virtual reality, and we know that it is as information, and I'll mention how we know that, it's information, then this is just a simulation. It's in a computer. So we have initial conditions and a rule set and a run button. And when we run the program, we run the simulation, it starts to evolve and interact. And that's the source of our physical reality. So now what is the source of the consciousness? Because you see, if you have a virtual reality, there's a couple of things that we know just from basic logic. Think about a virtual reality. Maybe you know perhaps The Sims. That's a virtual reality, or maybe World of Warcraft. That's another. Let's take World of Warcraft because it has elves in it. So when I say elf, everybody knows I'm talking about that virtual reality. When you have a virtual reality like the World of Warcraft, we have an elf in there. The elf is an avatar. Okay, right. It experiences, and the player that's playing that elf, sitting at his computer with his mouse and monitor, the player is that elf's consciousness. You see, without that player giving that elf instructions, the elf just stands there and does nothing. The player makes all the choices. Okay? So
much for free will.
No, free will is an absolute.
All right. Okay. I get the feeling that there's somebody out there pushing buttons and running us here, but go ahead.
Okay, so there's a few logical things that we know about virtual realities. One, the server that the computer that creates that virtual reality, that World of Warcraft, has to exist outside of the virtual reality that it creates. In other words, a simulation can't create itself. So the server that is creating the virtual reality World of Warcraft, that server, that computer, is not part of the World of Warcraft reality. It's outside of that. So the elf's world is a physical world to the elf. The elf, falls in water, it drowns. The elf has to open doors to go inside. The elf runs into a tree, he gets hurt. It's a physical world to the elf, and the server, the computer, is non-physical to the elf. Now, the consciousness and the computer are in a dialogue passing information back and forth. They have to be in the same reality frame because they're exchanging data directly. So the consciousness, the player, and the computer are in the same reality frame, and it's a non-physical frame to the elf. So this is just the fundamental property of a virtual reality. The virtual reality seems physical to whatever's in it, in this case the elf, okay, the avatar. But the consciousness, the player, and the computer, the thing that's rendering the game, are non-physical to that virtual reality. They're non-physical to the elf, and they are in the same reality frame. All right, now consciousness, we said earlier, is a digital information system. Well, what does that sound like? It sounds like a computer. It's a digital information system. It's all about information. What consciousness does is it sends and receives information. It passes information back and forth. Okay, so, and it does that as a, in the form of digital information, whether it's, photons and nerve impulses, or in this case, when it's non-physical to our virtual reality, then consciousness is outside. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, where does the consciousness come from, and what's its origins, and how, and why do we have this non-physical to us computer creating this virtual reality? Well, consciousness is just this evolving. It's also evolving. It's an evolving system. Now, information systems evolve by lowering their entropy. That is, by taking random bits and turning them into information, creating something. Entropy is a measure of disorder. So if all the bits in the system are random, there is no information. As those bits get ordered, then the order creates the information. That order then can be given a meaning. It can be a symbol, so it means something. So anyway, information systems survive by lowering their entropy, creating useful information. Now, if you have a bunch of consciousnesses just interacting with each other, that's a very difficult way to lower the entropy of the system, because there's very little traction there between individuals. It'd be like 100,000 people in a big chat room with no rules. Well, it's hard to tell, who's telling the truth and who's making up stories, and it's hard to get any feedback from the effect that you're having or anybody's having on you. So it's not a good system. So the consciousness system, now this consciousness system starting to sound like God, isn't it? This yes. Larger consciousness system then decides that in order to facilitate its own evolution, it creates a virtual reality where the individuated units of consciousness can be the players. The virtual reality creates the avatars, that would be our body, and they can interact with each other. And now that interaction has traction. You see the effects of what your choices are. They have immediate effects and consequences, whereas before they had very few effects and consequences that you could put your hands on, that you knew about.
Tom?
So that's the reason why we have the virtual reality. Yes.
Do these players, I see where it all gets me a little bit, where I have questions, let's put it that way, is often this is described as, humans are the players. And certainly humans are players in the reality set that we're in. Okay? But what about the other players? What about the plants, the animals, and the non-terrestrial entities that might be playing in the same computer set?
Okay, now first of all, humans are not the players. Humans are an evolved thing inside this virtual reality game.
Okay.
This is a virtual reality game, and remember, we evolved the universe, and then we evolved some biology, and we evolved eventually humans. So humans are the avatar. They're a species in this virtual reality. And that, their consciousness is the player. The consciousness isn't human. The avatar is human, just like the avatar is an elf.
Right.
See, the avatar is a human. Okay, now consciousness, this virtual reality, evolved all kinds of things. It didn't just evolve, these human avatars in a vacuum. It evolved plants and animals and all sorts of things in this simulation came out of it. And anything that makes choices has free will. And by making choices and having free will, I mean that they have an ability to choose, say, one of n choices that they might have. Like, okay, something pops up in front of me and I have choices. I can stay still and examine it. I can scream and run. I can immediately attack. Yes, I've got all these choices. And these are just the choices I know of. I may have a lot of other choices that I'm not aware of, things that I could do. And if you have free will, I define free will as an ability to choose one of the things that are in your decision space. That's of the choices you know about. You get to pick one, and you get to do that freely. Okay, now everything that has free will choice is consciousness. It's all consciousness. So your dog and your cat and the rabbits outside and even some of the insects that have free will choices can actually make decisions, even if it's a very small decision space. They are conscious, and they are doing the same thing we're doing. They're making choices, and by those choices, they either help evolve the quality of their consciousness, which means reduce their entropy of their consciousness, or they de-evolve it. Now, when you reduce your entropy of your consciousness and evolve, I can give you a little logic if you're interested. That equates to becoming love. You see, consciousness is these individual units of consciousness interact with each other. That's what consciousness does. That constitutes a social system. A social system evolves and lowers its entropy through cooperation, caring about other, not about self. The opposite of love is fear, and fear is all about self. It's about me. What about me? How am I going to make sure that I get what I need? And that's the fear base. So there's two sides here. So the way consciousness evolves is to cooperate, care, compassion, evolve toward becoming love. That means their choices are made in an intent that is love. Now, love is defined as the nature of a low entropy consciousness.
Can I ask you a question in here vis-a-vis this? Because I essentially do not disagree with you, and probably that's why I invited you on. But can we make the tent a little bit bigger? I mean, would you make the tent a little bit bigger so that what I mean to say by that is that making a moral choice about things sometimes includes non-humans. Like if I make a moral choice to be kind to animals or not to cut the tree down, that is making a moral choice towards something else.
Sure.
And it could be that from the point of view of the cow, we're creating entropy in their world by chopping them up and eating them.
Sure.
And could it be also the case that something like the earth or the sun or the moon or what we would consider inanimate objects also have a consciousness that just because they don't respirate, we are not aware of in the typical way, in the very typical way which we humans think about consciousness.
Okay. The first about the animals, as I say, the animals are conscious just like we are. They are no different than us. They're not at a higher level, a lower level. They are just like us. They're another evolved avatar, and they make choices because they have a player, they have a consciousness that is making the choices. You see, so they are no different than us, and they have the exact same mission, and that is to make choices that lowers their entropy. They can grow up and evolve the quality of their consciousness just as we do. So, yes, when you are kind to an animal, it's no different than being kind to a human or kind to a bumblebee. That's kindness, and that tent is very big. So now we get to things like the sun or the moon or a rock. If an entity makes free will choices, if it can choose among several things that are open to it, then it's conscious, and it has consciousness, it has awareness, and that sort of thing. Now, if it does not, like a rock, a rock does not choose to roll downhill. A rock rolls downhill if it gets kicked or bumped, just because that's the way the rule set works. Because of gravity, it rolls downhill, you see? So it's not making any decisions. Now we take a plant. A sunflower will track the sun with its flower, but is it making a decision to do that? Is that a choice? Or is it just because the sun heats up one side of the stem and not the other, The other side's in the shade, and that puts different tension in the two sides, which makes the sunflower move in the direction of the sun. So you see, there are things that just happen because they're programmed. It's like an algorithm. They just work that way. It's the way they do. It's the rule set. And there's other things that have consciousness that make free will choices amongst the decision space that they happen to have. So that's how I differentiate that. Now, there is a thing called collective consciousness as well, which is if you have a lot of individuated units of consciousness, which, by the way, are all netted. Everything is netted to everything else. All consciousness is netted. So you and that cow are actually netted. You not only share this virtual reality as avatars, but you are connected to all things that are conscious. You're connected.
Okay. But what about, let's say, you mentioned The Rock, and I have nothing much to say about The Rock, except I kind of like them. But
I do too.
There is something like, say, the Earth as a being of some sort that may be able to control certain things within itself, like the choice to explode volcanoes or to cast off certain inhabitants and not cast off others. Do you think anything of the Gaia principle?
Well, let me put it this way. Yes, the things that you are saying that can happen, that are things that do happen, but it's not necessarily because the Earth is conscious as a conscious entity. You see, remember, this is a virtual Earth. This is a computed Earth. It's just in the virtual reality. Consciousness is the one running the computer. So the consciousness system can modify the Earth to explode, up a volcano or not. It can modify things like that. But all these things abide by the rule set, by pressures and forces. And, if these two plates pull apart, then magna comes up between them, and that has to end up getting to the surface, and that starts the volcano. And all these things are just part of the rule set. But besides there being a rule set, there's also an intelligent force going on here, which is consciousness, the larger consciousness system. You see, so yes, those things can happen. You can see that wherever there is uncertainty, then the system, the larger conscious system, can modify, if you will, can nudge what happens within that uncertainty. If there is no uncertainty, then it just has to go the way it goes. The rock just rolls downhill. So the uncertainty is what creates choice. When you have 5 choices, there's uncertainty as to which one you'll choose, and you have to decide. And when you make a choice, then that uncertainty collapses to a particular choice.
Yeah, but the decision has to be based on certain facts that in and of themselves do not have consciousness. For example, if you want to go through a door, you have to move the doorknob. The doorknob has no consciousness. Your feet actually don't. So it seems almost...
no, you are an avatar, and you have a rule set. The rule set says that you can't walk through doors. Your elf can't walk through a door either.
Right.
The elf has to open the door with the doorknob. So that's just us in a virtual reality with a rule set. World of Warcraft has a rule set, and that rule set determines what that elf can do, how energy is exchanged, the things that have to happen in that virtual reality. And like I say, the elf gets in the water and can't swim, the elf drowns. That's because the rule set in World of Warcraft declares that to be so. So in our virtual reality, we have this rule set, and it's all our science, all our biology, all our chemistry, all the rules that we haven't yet come across, that we have to abide by those rules. But where there's uncertainty in what the rule can do, in other words, you have rule sets, but the rule sets have a lot of probability in them, and there's uncertainty and there's choice, and within that choice, then consciousness can make nudges, can make a difference.
So we have intentional changes then. By having intentions about things, we can nudge the probability in in certain ways.
Exactly. That is one of the attributes of this virtual reality populated by we players, we individuated units of consciousness. It's part of our feedback in that a focused intent modifies future probability. This simulation, that of which our bodies are the avatars, is not a deterministic simulation. It's a probabilistic simulation. It's got a rule set that does some deterministic calculations in it, but the simulation itself is a probabilistic simulation. And there is a probable future that has to do with all the possibilities of all the choices that the conscious things, including the cows and the groundhogs, can make and do, and all the things that the rule set says will happen, like too much pressure, so a volcano pops up. We have all those possibilities in the future, and intent can modify those probabilities to make something more or less likely to happen. That's how the placebo effect works. That's how mental healing works. Placebo effect works because you change intentions. The intentions change future probability.
So, in your opinion, would something that would be like a non-terrestrial entity, would that be something within the simulation, like just another creature from Zeta Reticuli, or could that be some kind of force playing with us from outside the reality set of this universe?
Could be either one, and generally it probably, it's likely to be both. In other words, if you have another being, another avatar someplace else in this universe, remember the whole universe is our virtual reality. So if there's some virtual avatar being played by a consciousness on some other planet, some other part of the universe, then they are, consciousness is playing them as well, just like it's playing us, and for the same reasons. And also, you can have consciousness that can interact with this system, okay? Because we're all netted. All consciousness is netted. So that's what your intuition is. You're getting data. You're getting information from this system. The system accumulates databases, a historical database and a future probable database, and you can get information from those. So everything is netted. You just have to focus your intent to open up that communication link to something specific, just like you have to go up and put a URL in your browser to get a particular website.
So is then the past mutable, or is the past set? In other words, can retrocausation play a part, or is the past one set direction?
Yeah, the past is set, but now it's set in that the things that have happened are in this large database, and this database is a probabilistic database. So you have everything that did happen, which we'll call our history, and everything that could have happened but didn't, and the probability that it might have happened. So you can get into this database, and it's just like being a character in a movie. You can watch it like you're in a theater watching it, or you can get right into it and interact with the characters. And as you interact with those characters, let's say from 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, they will react to you. They will interact with you. Doesn't mean that they're alive and conscious. It just means that they are giving probable reactions to whatever stimuli you create. And that's some of the experiments I did. Figuring that out took a lot of experiments to understand that these were databases. Because my first thought was that the past was alive there, but it turns out it's just data in a database. It's probabilistic, and you can interact with it. You can query it in ways that's like being there and interacting. But no, there's no causality coming from the past. Once it's done, but it lives on in this history database, because this history database isn't just facts of what happened. The history database, let's say of of you. Let's take you and something you did yesterday or 20 years ago. That's in the database, but it's not just what you did. It's every thought you had about it, your feelings, your intuition, your emotions,
and how it affected everybody else.
How it affected everybody else, and the connections between all the other people there. And now there's probability. So you could go into yourself and be yourself. You could go back to that time, let's say 20 years ago, and you could then either watch yourself like watching a movie and see these interactions and the choices you were making, or you could actually go and take over that spot of yourself and do something different that you didn't do. And you would see that the changes it would make, because now these other beings would interact differently, because they would have a probability of what they would do if you did this, and a probability of what you would do if they did that. And then you can follow all the ramifications of your interaction to this group, to that group interacts another group. You can follow it all out. But now it's all done in probability. It wouldn't necessarily happen just the way you saw it, because people have free will.
Our engineer, Bill, poses a question as to whether going back would affect the present or the future. In other words, if I were to go back into my life, say 20 years ago, and let's say I slapped somebody in the face. I haven't done that recently at all since I was in grade school, but let's say I did. And I went back and I didn't do that in my reset of that.
Right.
Would that affect the current, in your theory of everything, would that affect the current world at all?
No, it does not affect the current world at all. It's butterfly effect, and there was a movie to that name, I believe, where they played with that idea. But no, it doesn't. It's just a historical database. It's just information in the computer. But remember, that's all our physical reality is. Our physical reality is just information in a computer. So this can be just as real if you go and interact there as it would be if you're here. But it's just in a database. You're just playing with information.
So you think it's one consciousness that is creating this, this database or this virtual reality? It couldn't be like a 3-player game. Let's say, I'm just putting it out there as a potential.
Okay, I did do of course, the question comes up immediately. So where does this consciousness come from? You see, and how did it get started? And in my books and in my lectures, I talk about that. And it seems the logic as it begins, and I do the minimum set. In other words, I don't assume anything that I don't have to. I don't just make things up because it sounds good or it would look nice or would produce a result I would like. Everything is what is it? It's a minimalist set of logical assumptions, and I have just 2 assumptions, and one of them is that consciousness exists and that evolution exists, and that's all I need. With those 2 assumptions, everything else then is logical process. It's all deductive after that. So we end up with a single large consciousness system, and from that it breaks apart into pieces in which it interacts with each other and with itself. So we are all parts of this one larger consciousness system. There's no need for having 2 or 3. So if there's no need, if there's no evidence that says it has to be that way, then I don't model it that way. Now, this is just a model.
Right.
This is not Tom Campbell telling you what to believe.
Exactly.
This is just a model of reality, and I tell people, don't believe anything I tell you. It's not about belief. This is a model, and if you can find resonance in this model that explains some of your experiences, and it explains like science and physics and other things as well, then use the model. And if it doesn't explain your experiences, then let it go. My active way I go about doing things is what I call open-minded skepticism. You have to be open-minded, otherwise you'll never learn anything new, and you have to be skeptical, otherwise you'll never have any idea whether what you learned, is valid or useful or not. So you have to do both of those at the same time.
Absolutely. I agree. And where can people get your book today? Where would they get the book, My Big Toe? And what are you doing these days? Do you have a schedule of seminars or anything like that coming up that we can put out there? And of course, your website. Please mention your website again.
Okay, the place to get the books, and they're My Big Toe. It's a trilogy. The first one's Awakening, the second one's Discovery, and the third one is Inner Workings. And you can get those any place you just get books. You can get them from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you can get them from your local neighborhood bookstore. And if they don't have them, they can order them. I have an international distributor that handles the books, and all bookstores deal with this distributor. So they're available in the normal channels. And if you don't want to buy a book, you'll find that all 3 books are for free on Google Books. So go there, and you can read as much of it as you like. It was the original one that was first published. As soon as I published it, I put it out there for free. So that's still there. And just go to Google and then ask for Google Books, and then you'll get a list of titles and put in My Big Toe or Thomas Campbell, and you'll get there.
Well, I'm thrilled to have my actual non-virtual copy of the trilogy, which is signed and autographed by you.
You only think it's non-virtual.
I only think it's non-virtual, but I have my 3-set paperback, dog-eared here, and with plenty of notes. And so, what is your website that has all the information? Give that out again, please, Tom.
The website is www.mybigtoe.com. And there you can go to my YouTube site, because there'll be links. And the YouTube site has about 140 videos. Every time I do a workshop or an interview or anything that I can get the electrons or at least a link to, I put it up there so others can watch it and listen to it on YouTube. Of course, there's no cost to any of that. So everything all the workshops I've done, you can find them up there. I suggest that if you go do that, you'll probably be overwhelmed, because not only are there so many, but many of them are rather long. Take it in small bites, 20 minutes at a time, and that's probably enough. And the same goes for the books. If you try to read them like you'd read a normal novel, you won't get much out of them. You got to think about these and let it kind of sink in for a few days before you take the next bite. Otherwise, you'd get at the end of it and you don't understand much.
I thank you so much for being our guest. It has been very interesting, and I do want to reiterate your one point about everyone finding, their own big toe, their own big theory of everything. That, I found much of your work to be resonating with me, and I have questions about little pieces here and there. And if you go back to the 2010 lecture, which is, I'm sure you'll hear my raucous voice in the background asking a few questions that I. But do you have anything coming up right now? In terms of seminars, or that the general public can go to?
Let's see. Next year, I haven't put my schedule together just yet. I've got something in Boston. I'll probably have something in Atlanta, and perhaps something else in more of the middle of the country. That's being put together. If you want to stay up on my schedule, it's www.mbtevents.com, and those will do that. Now, 2017, I'm putting together a schedule that will take me to New Zealand and Australia and Singapore and India and a whole lot of places. That's going to be
well, that's important for our international listeners, which we have quite a few international listeners and fans. So that will be important for them. And so I just want to say thank you very much for taking time out to speak with us today. And I will be seeing you in March in Faber, Virginia. So I will be seeing you personally in March, and I can't wait to shake your hand again, Tom, because you're a great guy. Kate? And
I also have to say thank you very much. Very enlightening. And Bill nods his head in agreement with us both.
Well, I have to apologize that all I can do in this short a time is kind of make statements. I can't logically derive things that that I derive in my books and in my seminars, and I always feel kind of bad that I just make statements and that's not the way I'd rather do it. But in an hour, that's all that I can do. So if you are interested in any of this, I actually do have logical derivations of all the things that I've talked about that you can read and get in the videos.
Well, I guess that differentiates you from most religions.
Well, you can certainly read many of the logical derivations in My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. And as we say goodbye now, thank you again. Have a wonderful, wonderful Halloween and October and all of that good stuff.
Those paranormals come to life.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that was very interesting, Fahrusha, and yet another really cool little episode to put in our collection. This was
indeed.
number 19.
And he is just so full of information.
It's somewhat overwhelming.
It is. It is a little bit overwhelming. I loved it. I wish we could have had him on longer, and I wish we could have delved into more of his personal experiences, which I think our listeners would have loved. And perhaps we can convince him to come on again sometime.
That would be good. That would be great.
And we will be endeavoring to broadcast 24 episodes this coming year. And so you can look for us about once every 2 weeks, we're hoping.
Well, number 20 is coming up with Mr. Greg Bishop.
We hope so.
You guys should look up Mr. Bishop, and if you have thoughts at all, it might be good to get on the email or on the webpage and start posting them, and then we can always ask Mr. Bishop when he's on.
Yes, and if you have any questions, please post your questions for either of us or our guest, and we will attempt to answer them for you. And we are working again on our iTunes connection. And so, thanks a lot.
Okay.
Have a happy Halloween. By the way, before we go, today is
more.
October 20th, 2015. We always have to date. Thank you.
We do? Oh,
yes,
okay.
we should.
All right. Well, there you go. And that's not virtual. Bye.